Hey, it's Deborah E. Johnson, and I just want to say welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if this is your first time. You're on the channel here, Deborah E. Johnson, where I tell of His goodness. I tell about the goodness of God. And you want to keep coming back to this channel because you want to keep receiving the positivity about how God takes care of us, how good He is to us, and what He's going to continue to do for us, not only today, but even tomorrow. And so I'm also going to ask you to stick around to the end because I have a little tiny surprise for you, something I've done as an add-on, and I surely want you to hear about it. Today, as we do tell of His goodness, we're going to talk about the book of Esther. And you know, each week I talk about a different book. I go through the books of the Bible and I give a summary of the book and how God is good and how that goodness even translates to us today. So in the book of Esther, there's a lot going on here, okay? So just kind of buckle your seatbelt. We start out with Esther, who is a Jew. She has come into the circumstance, so a little bit of the backstory. King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, he is a great king. He has a vast amount of land, and he's showing off his goods and his wealth to his lords and the princes and everybody in his country. He has this big feast, and he says for his current queen, Vashti, to come and show herself to all of his guests. Well, she refuses. And so guess what he does? She refuses to come. And so he ends up having her be banished from the land. And his advisors say, not only should you banish her, but you should look for a new queen. So he does. After going through a year-long, at least a year-long search, Esther is brought into the group of women, the virgins that should be considered. And she gets noticed. And she takes wise advice. She doesn't take anything special. She's just done what she's been advised to do. And she goes in and she gets his attention. And of course, she actually becomes his queen. So she's a Jewess who is being raised by her cousin Mordecai, who has a kind of a high position in the court. And so life happens, and suddenly Mordecai finds out that somehow the king there's a plot to assassinate him. And so he makes sure that the king doesn't get assassinated, but there's no real reward that happens. That situation happens. The king gets saved. Life goes on. Later on, the king hires Haman. Well, Haman is against Mordecai. He's against the Jews. One piece of research I read is that he comes from the Amalekites, which they never liked the Jews. So there was a kind of an inbred hatred towards the Jews within Haman's heart. At any rate, Haman's living his life. He thinks he's got the grand life. And he's in front of the king. He's got the king's attention. And so he's great, except for whenever he sees Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't bow down to him. Mordecai doesn't pay him any attention. And so that kind of always ruffles Haman's feathers. Well, one night when the king couldn't sleep, he asked the records to be read to him. And guess what? The story that he was going to get assassinated comes back to him. And he says, did I ever do anything to honor that man? Well, Haman is trying to plot against Mordecai because he doesn't like him. Remember that. And so Haman comes in and he says, the king says to him, what should be done to the man that I want to honor? Well, Haman, of course, thinks he's talking about Haman, right? He doesn't realize the king is talking about Mordecai. So he says, well, you should have this man riding around in a royal robe, and it be announced that this is the man that the king delights to honor. So the king said to Haman, do that right now, and do it for Mordecai. Well, of course, Haman was steaming, but he followed the orders and he did what he was supposed to do. In the meantime, Haman is definitely trying to get rid of Mordecai. He decides to do a whole plot where he's going to get rid of not only Mordecai, but the Jews, the Jewish race. He creates a decree about it. It's all set in the works. And then all of a sudden, Esther finds out about it. And she's like, what's going on, Mordecai? Mordecai tells her about it. And she doesn't want to do anything about it, technically, because she does want to talk to the king, but she hasn't talked to the king in 30 days. And there's this whole ritual that if you haven't talked to the king in 30 days and he doesn't hold a scepter out to you, you could get killed. Well, since Esther hasn't seen him for 30 days and he hasn't called for her, she doesn't want to just abruptly go in because it could mean her life. Well, after some consideration, after talking to Mordecai, who reminds her that maybe you're in the king's palace for such a time as this, she then decides she's going to fast. She's going to ask God to help her people. She tells Mordecai to fast, tells the Jews to fast. All of her ladies will help her fast. And she does the fasting. And then she says the famous line, I'm going to go into Mordecai. I'm going to go into the king. And if I perish, I perish. And so she does do what she says. She goes into the king. He holds out his golden scepter, so her life is spared. She has a dinner along with the king and Haman. And of course, Haman is excited. And then the king says, well, what do you want? She doesn't ask for anything right away, except for it to come back to a second banquet, right? She's really setting us up. So she says, come back to a second banquet. They come back to a second banquet. And guess what? Then she announces what she wants to have happen. I should say in the meantime, Haman was so upset about Mordecai that he'd built some gallows to have Mordecai hung on. So all of this is kind of pulling together at the same time. Haman goes to the second dinner with the king and Queen Esther. The queen tells the king what's going on, that her people are going to be killed on a certain day. And the perpetrator is Haman. The king walks out so angry. Haman then basically is trying to fight for his life, but unfortunately he falls on the queen. Oh my gosh, can you see the drama? He falls on the queen, and the king walks in and thinks, oh my gosh, you're trying to molest the queen right in front of my presence. And you know what happens. Haman gets hanged on the very gallows that he was trying to set up for Mordecai. Now that's a long story, right? And I just want to say, how do we know that this is goodness? There's goodness in this. Well, there's goodness in this for the people of the Jewish race because they get delivered, and they have to get delivered because not only does the decree that was set has to be denied or falsified, then the queen gets the king after Haman gets taken off the scene to put out another decree that says, okay, that first decree that Haman put out, you can no longer do anything with that. We're going to put our second decree that says that the Jews have every right to fight. The Jews have every right to take care of themselves. And so they are delivered out of that situation. There is actually a current feast that happens in honor and memory of that deliverance. I want to say it's the Feast of Purim, where they get to say, hey, we celebrate and remember that Esther got us out of this situation by having her faith in God. And so that's the goodness we see in here, that God always has somebody who has faith in him, doesn't he? Oh my gosh. And I'm going to ask you, is it your turn to be the one who has faith? Do you want to act like the queen? Do you want to be like the queen? Do you want to be the one who has faith that God's going to take care of you no matter what's going on? Consider it, won't you? You act like the queen too. You can do it. I can do it. We can have that kind of faith in God that no matter what, how treacherous, how debilitating the situation may seem, that we can have the faith in God that we need to have. God's going to bring us through. So that's the goodness I want you to see in the book of Esther. I'm about to wrap this up. I did promise that I was going to tell you something and share something. As I've been doing my best to improve this channel, I also started adding in more playlists. And at the end of one of the playlists is actually a song, a Tell of His Goodness song, or Tell of God how good God is. So I'm going to put the playlist link in here, and I want you to listen to that just as a reminder in song of how good God is to us. He takes care of us all the time. Don't forget it. Remember, he's looking out for us. It doesn't matter how dark the day, how bad the night. Think about an entire Jewish race possibly getting annihilated back then in, I want to say in the 480 BCs, and God took care of it. He's going to take care of us today too. Remember that, won't you? This is Deborah E. Johnson saying, remember, tell of his goodness. He's going to take care of us, and we have a reason to say why he is good. Talk to you soon. Remember, like, subscribe, share, all that great stuff. And I'll see you soon. Bye.